The West was never meant for the gentle-hearted. It broke them. It branded them. And when the dust cleared, only the strongest remained standing. Tonight's story carries us into that merciless land where a towering young woman hunted like an animal stands at the edge of a cliff with no place left to run. Chains, bullets, and betrayal chase her steps. But fate has other plans, because a lone rancher in a dying town will raise his hand at an auction and in that single moment change both their lives forever. Follow this story to the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see just how far my story has traveled. The sound of breaking branches tore through the dusk. Claire Sullivan's lungs burned as if fire had been poured inside them. For 3 days she had run without stopping, and still the men were behind her. Horses snorted hooves, striking the earth like hammers. The smell of sweat iron and powder followed close enough she could taste it. Her tall frame cut through the thickets, her red-gold hair whipped loose face, bleeding from the sharp whip of branches. She did not dare slow. Ahead the trees thinned, the sky opened wide. Her boots slid on loose shale as she reached the edge of a cliff, its drop a black mouth swallowing stone into a ravine. She stopped, chest heaving. Behind her, 5 riders fanned out from the tree line, rifles catching the light. One wore a bowler hat tilted low, another had a filthy scarf masking his jaw. Their laughter spread like a disease across the canyon. "Nowhere left to run, girl," the man in the bowler hat called, his voice dragging a southern drawl. "Jammin wants his property back. Says you're worth too much to lose." Claire's eyes gray as storm clouds narrowed. She straightened almost 6 feet of iron-boned defiance. "I'm not property," she said low but steady, her voice cutting through the wind. The men chuckled. "That's exactly what you are. Asset S7, paid for bread and broken." Her hand closed around a jagged rock by her feet. She didn't think, only acted. The stone whistled through the air and struck the bowler-hatted man square in the face. He toppled backward, hoarse screaming. Before the others recovered, Clara lunged, yanking another rider from his saddle with feral strength. The horse shrieked, staggering under the sudden shift. She almost made it to the saddle. Almost. But the crack of rifle butt against skull ended the attempt. Stars exploded behind her eyes, the ground tilted, and darkness rushed up fast as thunder. When she woke, her wrists ached with iron. Redemption Springs smelled of dust, whiskey, and sweat baked into timbers. The auction block stood high in the square, a place made for cattle, not people. Today, though, a different kind of merchandise was on display. The crowd gathered beneath the pitiless sun. Men chewed tobacco, spat brown streams into the dirt, and jostled for a better look. On the edge of the square, a tall figure lingered, hat brim pulled low. His name was Ethan Rowe, a man who had fought in the war and returned with silence for a companion. He hadn't come for this. He had come for grain ammunition, maybe a plow blade from Miller's store. The auction was noise, something to endure while waiting for the heat to break. Next up, the auctioneer crowed, wiping sweat from his bald scalp with a rag. "Got ourselves a woman. Good for cooking, cleaning, whatever you need, gentlemen." Laughter rippled across the square. Ethan shifted his weight uncomfortably. Slave trading had been outlawed years back, but here, miles from any marshal, they called it labor contracting. A lie wrapped in a different word. "She's a bit wild," the auctioneer went on, lowering his voice in mock confidence. "Broke a man's arm with nothing but a broom handle. But strong as a mule. Workhorse material if you've got the hand to control her." The crowd murmured, curious, amused. Then they brought her out. Clara. Chains rattled around her ankles as she stepped onto the platform. She stood taller than most men, sun-darkened skin tight over muscle earned by hardship, not comfort. Her braid gleamed like a streak of fire in the light. Her eyes fixed on something far beyond the square. They refused to acknowledge the hungry gazes below. Ethan's breath caught. Something about the defiance in that stance, chin up despite the chains, struck a chord so deep it rattled old ghosts awake. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "Starting bid $50. Silence. 40. A few men chuckled. Someone spat. 30 then. Strong arms boys. Worth her weight just for the work she'll do. Ethan didn't know why he did it. Maybe it was the memory of his brother Thomas gone because Ethan had been too late. Maybe it was the bitterness of war teaching him what ownership of people truly meant. Or maybe it was simply that no soul deserved to be sold like livestock. 30, he said. His voice was rough from disuse. Heads turned. A ripple of laughter rolled through the crowd. "Rose finally buying company out at that godforsaken ranch," someone muttered. The auctioneer blinked. 30 from Ethan Rowe. "Do I hear 35? "Nothing. 30. Going once. Twice sold." The gavel fell. Chains clinked as they pushed Clara forward. Ethan stepped out of the shade, pulling bills from his pocket. The auctioneer shoved papers into his hand, a contract worthless ink on cheap parchment. Ethan didn't look at it. Instead, he knelt and unlocked the chain himself, unwilling to let another hand treat her like cargo. Up close, he saw scars etched along her jaw, crossing her forearms like roads on a map, battles carved into skin. "You got a name?" he asked, quiet. Her gaze met his, unflinching, cold. "Clara," she said, like the dream. Ethan gave a short nod, handed her the boots they'd stripped from her feet. She pulled them on without thanks. Then she stood neither submissive nor hostile, simply present. "I've got supplies to pick up," he said, gesturing toward the street. "Then we ride." The crowd had already turned away, bored. A pair of mules was led onto the block. The square buzzed again, erasing the moment like chalk from a slate. But Ethan Rowe knew the air had changed. Something had shifted. And as Clara walked beside him, silent chains gone but unseen ones still clinging, Ethan felt the weight of a decision he hadn't planned to make. Not a purchase. A promise. The kind a man couldn't break and remain whole. The wagon wheels groaned as they left Redemption Springs, iron rims grinding over ruts carved deep by years of stagecoaches and cattle drives. The heat pressed down heavy, the kind that stuck to skin and crawled into bone, carrying with it the acrid sting of dust. Ethan Rowe sat high on the bench reins, steady in his weather-scarred hands. Beside him, Clara was silent, back rigid eyes fixed on the horizon as though the town no longer existed. The chains had been struck, but the weight of them still clung like ghosts around her ankles. The square faded behind them. Laughter from the auction still echoed in Ethan's ears. He hated himself for hearing it, for standing there at all, for raising his hand. Clara shifted once, just enough to adjust her boots. They had taken her shoes, stripped her of even that simple dignity. Now she wore them again, but the leather bit at her ankles raw from iron. She said nothing yet. Her silence was sharper than any blade. Ethan cleared his throat, the sound too loud against the desert hush. "Ranch is 20 miles out," he said, eyes on the mules. "We'll reach it by nightfall." Clara didn't answer. The wagon rolled on. Minutes stretched into miles, the only sounds the creak of the axles and the steady clip of hooves. The silence between them thickened, pressing against Ethan's chest until he spoke again, unthinking. "You'll have your own quarters. Bunkhouse. Roof leaks a little in the north corner, but it's yours. Door doesn't lock." Still no reply. Ethan tightened his grip on the reins. "I don't own you. Paper says different, but it's not worth the ink. You work, I feed you, give you a place to rest. That's the deal." This time Clara's head turned slightly. Her gray eyes met his unreadable storm clouds, refusing to break. "Why?" she asked. The word was soft, but it carried weight enough to halt the air itself. Ethan hesitated. Why had he raised his hand when no one else dared? The memory of Thomas flickered, his brother slipping from the ridge, the screams swallowed by dust and wind, the helplessness, the guilt, the echo of war. "I don't rightly know," he admitted. His voice came rough like gravel dragged across stone. Clara studied him a long moment, then turned back to the road. The faintest twitch ghosted at the corner of her mouth. Not a smile, not yet, but something dangerously close to life stirring in a place long buried. The horizon stretched endless, the prairie rolling in waves of copper and gold under the sinking sun. For a while they let silence reclaim its throne. Hours passed. The wagon rattled through gullies where shadows pooled thick. Sagebrush perfumed the cooling air, and the first coyotes yipped somewhere distant. Clara sat tall, her hands resting on her knees, a soldier in everything but name. Ethan stole a glance, catching the faint sheen of sweat on her temple, the scar tracing sharp across her jaw. He wanted to ask, wanted to know who had carved pain into her skin like scripture, but he swallowed the words, letting them rot unsaid. Instead, he offered the only thing he could. "There's food in the sack. Jerky. Apples if you want." Clara's gaze flicked down. Slowly, she reached into the sack, withdrew a dried apple slice. She chewed without expression, like someone who had learned not to savor, only to survive. Ethan forced his eyes back to the trail. After a while, she spoke again, voice quiet but steady. "You don't talk much." Caught off guard. Ethan let a laugh slip low and dry. "Neither do you." Her eyes glinted in the fading light. "Fair point." The wagon rolled on, their words swallowed by the prairie wind. But something had shifted thin, almost invisible, yet enough to carve space between silence and solitude. Dusk bled into night. The stars came first as pinpricks, then as rivers of silver across the sky. The moon hung low, pale, and watchful. Ethan guided the mules down the last stretch, the outline of his ranch rising against the horizon. Not much to look at. A sagging porch, a weather-beaten barn, a corral in need of repair. But it was his built from splinter and sweat after the war when nothing else made sense. The wagon stopped in the yard. Ethan climbed down boots, striking dust, and gestured toward the small building off to the side. "Bunkhouse. It's yours." Clara stepped down tall against the starlight, shoulders squared though exhaustion pulled at her. She looked at the bunkhouse, then at him. A question lingered in her eyes, though she didn't speak it. "It's not a cage," Ethan said, voice rougher than intended. "Door doesn't lock. You can come and go. I don't own you. Paper says I do, but that paper lies." Her eyes lingered on him, searching. Not quite trust, but suspicion thinned like clouds parting to show a star. Why would you say that, she asked at last. After paying good money, Ethan shifted, suddenly uncomfortable. He busied himself unhooking the mules. Because no man should own another. War taught me that much. For a moment the night stood still. Clara's lips parted as though to speak, then closed again. Instead, she walked toward the bunkhouse, her stride long and certain, like she'd already claimed the land as her own. Ethan watched her go. For the first time since Thomas died, the ranch didn't feel empty. He carried supplies inside the main house, the silence wrapping around him different. Now less suffocating, more waiting. He paused, once looking out the window. Through the darkness, he saw the faint outline of Clara standing outside her bunkhouse, staring at the stars as though daring them to blink first. Something twisted in his chest. Something he couldn't name. The bunkhouse door stuck like it remembered winters past. Ethan leaned his shoulder into it, wood groaning as it gave way with a sigh. Dust curled in lamplight, drifting like pale ghosts looking for home. "It isn't much," he said. "But it's yours." Clara paused at the threshold. Tall, unmoving, she scanned the room with a soldier's discipline. A narrow bed wool blanket folded exact. A plank table, a wooden trunk with a rusted hasp. 2 pegs hammered into the wall. A small window set high, letting a square of moonlight fall on the floorboards. Her gaze dropped to the latch. A simple iron tongue. She lifted it with 2 fingers. It rose. It fell. No lock. Ethan didn't comment. He set the lamp on the table and stepped back, leaving the doorway clear. Her choice. Outside the windmill clicked a tired rhythm. Somewhere beneath the ground, the spring shifted and stilled. The ranch held its breath. Clara stepped in at last. Her palm grazed the blanket, coarse but clean. She touched the sill where a wasp's abandoned nest clung fragile and forgotten. She tracked rafters, checked hinges, traced seams where the roof joined wall. Every movement practiced, habit carved by survival. Ethan knew the ritual. War had trained him to read rooms the same way, where shadows pooled, how doors swung, what line a bullet might take. He said nothing, only watched her claim the space by testing it. "There's a pump behind the barn," he said. "Tin tub under the lean-to. Water's cold but clean." He lifted a bundle. "Clothes. Best guess at your size." For the first time since the auction, something shifted in her eyes. Not thanks. Not trust. But the edge of relief buried deep. He placed the bundle on the trunk, then stepped back. "Take your time. I'll start supper." He didn't wait for an answer. The kitchen smelled of iron and smoke. Ethan laid salt pork in the skillet. It spat and curled at the edges. He cracked eggs, stirred them, rough dropped bread in the pan to toast. He set 2 plates, stared at the second too long, then left it anyway. Footsteps crossed the porch. He poured coffee thick as tar into 2 enamel mugs, told himself one would keep till morning. The door opened. Clara entered, hair damp from the pump, skin raw from scrubbing. She wore a faded blue shirt, trousers too wide at the waist, but strong at the seams. The clothes seemed made for her waiting all this time. She paused, eyes flicking once around the room, mapping exits, corners, shadows. Then she sat opposite him, posture straight, hands coiled on the table like rope. "Eat," Ethan said, sliding the nearer plate. She took half, ate quickly, efficient as someone used to rations stolen, if not fast enough. When she hesitated, he pushed the rest toward her. "Plenty," he said. Her gaze locked on his. Testing. Then she finished it all. The room filled with quiet, fork on tin stove, ticking wind in the eaves. Not empty silence. Waiting silence. Ethan spoke first. "Tomorrow I'll show you the spring. Corral needs mending. Garden, too. You pick where to start." Clara set her fork down carefully. "You always let hired hands choose no." He met her stare. "Just people who've never been allowed to." Something unreadable flickered across her face. The silence grew, changed shape. No longer a wall, but a door not yet opened. She drank coffee, grimaced at the bitterness. "I don't plan to stay long." Ethan only nodded. "That's your choice. If you go, there's food in the storeroom. Take what you need." She studied him, eyes storm gray, sharp. "Why?" His finger traced a crack in the table. A dozen answers crowded Thomas war chains, but he said only, "Because it's right." Her expression didn't soften, but the tension eased at the edges. She rose without sound. At the door, she stopped. "Thank you," she said, so quiet he almost missed it. Then she slipped back into the night. Ethan cleaned plates slow, listening for her steps across the yard. 14 strides. The pause. The door hinge. The click of the latch lifted, tested, lowered again. He stared at the empty mantel where a photo once stood. 2 boys in Sunday shirts, cottonwood shadow behind them. He had locked it away, unable to bear the younger's smile. Tonight, the ache returned, familiar and sharp. Outside, the windmill kept turning. When he lay down, sleep didn't come. He listened instead until a sound stirred the dark. The pump handle creaked. Water poured silver under the moon. He pictured her there, sleeves rolled, steam rising from her skin where the cold bit. He closed his eyes and held the image. The first in years that didn't wound him. Before dawn, he rose, built the fire-ground coffee slow. Bacon sizzled, eggs cracked. He told himself it was breakfast for one. But when he stepped outside for wood, he saw her already at the corral, studying the south fence. "Up early," he said. "Fence is rotting," she replied. "Won't hold stock." He followed her gaze. She was right. He'd put it off too long. "Lumber's behind the barn. Auger too. I'll fix it." He thought to argue posts, heavy holes, backbreaking, but stopped. She wasn't boasting, just measuring herself against the day. "Breakfast first," he said. She turned, and in the thin light he saw something small, stubborn, almost alive in her expression. "Fine. But I don't take charity." "It's not charity," he said. "It's breakfast." Her mouth almost curved into a smile. Almost. They walked back to the house side by side. Not close. Not far. 2 figures learning how to share the horizon. The rooster hadn't yet found its voice when Ethan set the skillet down. Salt pork hissed. Bread darkened in the pan, edges curling like parchment. He slid half to her plate, the rest to his own, though, truth be told, he wasn't hungry. Clara ate without flourish, knife scraping fork steady. She chewed quick, eyes lowered like every bite might be taken if she paused too long. Ethan forced himself to eat too, though every swallow tasted of ash. Not because the food was bad, because he kept watching her, the way she measured the room, the way her shoulders stayed braced like she sat on the edge of battle rather than a wooden chair. "You work quiet," he said. Her eyes lifted. Gray as storm clouds, unreadable. "Noise gives you away." He nodded slowly. "Fair enough." For a time, the only sound was the tick of the stove. Then Clara surprised him. She reached for another piece of bread, slower this time. Not a thief snatching scraps, but a woman taking what she needed. Ethan didn't smile, but inside something eased. When she finished, she set her utensils down neatly, precise as drilled soldiers. "Fence first," she said. He blinked. "You sure?" "Yes." That one word carried weight, not suggestion, decision. So he didn't argue. By the time the sun stretched pale across the horizon, Claire was hauling lumber to the south side. Ethan followed with tools, though it felt more like he was trailing than leading. She inspected the posts like a carpenter-born, fingers tracing wrought eyes narrowing where rails sagged. She hefted a beam one-handed, laid it across her shoulder, and strode like it weighed nothing. Ethan found himself staring. He had seen men half her size stumble with less. "You ever mend fence before?" he asked. "No," she said, already setting the beam in place. "But I learned fast." And she did. By noon, 3 posts were sunk rails reset. Sweat streaked her temples, dampened her shirt, but her arms moved steady, never flagging. Ethan kept pace where he could, sawing, digging, handing tools. But the truth gnawed at him. She didn't need him to keep up. She was faster, stronger, surer. When the last rail dropped, she leaned on the auger chest, rising steady eyes on the line of fence, now standing proud. "That'll hold." Ethan wiped his brow with his sleeve. "Reckon it will." He meant more than the fence. They ate bread and cold pork in the shade of the barn. Clara chewed deliberate slow, now savoring as if she finally believed it would not be snatched away. Ethan found himself talking more than he had in years. About the spring that never ran dry, even in drought. About the north pasture thick with buffalo grass. About the stove in winter, how it fought him every cold morning like a mule that didn't want harness. Clara listened. Not idly, not polite. She asked questions. Short, practical ones about soil water predators. Never about him. Never about Thomas. Never about the war. He noticed and respected it. The days that followed fell into rhythm. Morning work, midday heat, evening quiet. Clara mended, hauled, cut, carried. She seemed carved for labor, like the land itself had shaped her body and will. At night she sat on the bunkhouse step, eyes turned skyward. Sometimes Ethan joined her silent. The stars didn't need words, and neither did they. But there were cracks. The first came 3 nights in. A scream ripped the stillness. Ethan bolted upright, rifle in hand, before he realized the sound came from her bunkhouse. He ran barefoot across the yard, heart pounding. He found Clara thrashing on her narrow bed, sweat darkening her shirt hands, clawing the air. "No, not again. Don't." He set the rifle down, reached carefully for her shoulder. "Clara," he said, "wake up. It's a dream." Her eyes snapped open, wild, unseeing. Her hand closed around his throat before he could breathe. He choked, fingers pulling at her grip. Panic flared not from fear of dying, but from the realization she wasn't awake. Recognition sparked. Her grip loosened. She shoved herself back against the wall, knees to her chest. Horror written across her face. I'm sorry." I thought Ethan rubbed his throat, drawing breath. "My fault," he rasped. "Shouldn't have touched you." For the first time he saw her small, fragile even, not a wild giant, not a storm, just a woman cornered by shadows. "What did they do to you?" he asked quietly. She pulled her sleeves down, hiding the scars etched like maps along her arms. "People who think they can own others," she whispered. "And they're not finished." Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, close but not too close. "Want to tell me?" She stared at nothing for so long he thought silence was her only answer. Then she spoke. "They call themselves Phoenix." The word carried ash and fire both. They don't just buy people, they make them, break them, rebuild them. Soldiers who don't feel fear, pain, mercy. She traced her arm through the sleeve where scars hid. "I was one of their subjects. S9 they called me. Too wild, they said. Couldn't be conditioned. So they sold me." Ethan's blood ran cold. "And they'll come looking." Her eyes lifted gray steel in the moonlight. "Yes. And when they do, I won't let them take me." Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't promise they wouldn't. He only said, steady as bedrock, "They'll have to go through me first." Clara's gaze held his, searching, testing. Then slowly she nodded. For the first time, trust flickered. And in that fragile moment, Ethan realized this woman wasn't just work, wasn't just company. She was a storm he had chosen to stand inside, and he would not step out. Dawn cracked across the horizon like a whip painting the scrubland in copper and gold. Ethan had barely slept. Every creak of timber, every stir of wind carried weight now, like the ranch itself braced for something unseen. He rose early, lit the stove-fried pork and eggs with a hand that shook less than the night before. The bruise along his throat pulsed with every swallow, a reminder of Clara's nightmare, her grip like iron. He touched it once, then let it be. Outside the corral rattled with the restless stallion. Clara stood beside the rails, steady hand brushing the animal's neck. Her posture was loose, patient, not forcing, not demanding. The stallion huffed, muscles bunching, but didn't shy away. Ethan leaned against the barn door, watching. "He won't let anyone near him," he said. "Tried everything. Might have to sell him." Clara shook her head. "He's not mean, he's afraid." Ethan chuckled dryly. "Same thing out here, only if you try to break him." Her hand slid slow across the stallion's muzzle. The animal's ears flicked, but it didn't bolt. Breaking isn't the only way to make something useful. Ethan studied her face, realizing she wasn't just talking about the horse. "What's the alternative?" She turned storm-gray eyes, catching his. "Respect." The stallion exhaled warm breath visible in the morning chill. Clara held steady, and the beast pressed its nose into her palm like a prayer answered. Ethan swallowed hard. She had just done in moments what he couldn't in months. "Where'd you learn that?" he asked. "When people treat you like an animal," she said, voice flat, "you learn how they think." Her hand lingered on the horse, but her gaze had gone somewhere far away. Ethan didn't ask more. Not yet. That night, the ranch breathed in silence. Ethan sat at his table knife, carving a strip of pine into something shapeless just to keep his hands busy. Across the yard, Clara's lamp flickered, then died. Hours later, the scream came. Raw, terrified. Not like before, worse. Ethan ran Boots' half-laced rifle in hand. He burst through the bunkhouse door. Clara writhed in her narrow bed hair plastered with sweat, her voice breaking. "Not the device, please." Ethan's gut clenched. He dropped the rifle, moved closer. "Clara, wake up!" Her arms lashed, her fists striking air. He hesitated only a second, then touched her shoulder. Her eyes flew open. This time she didn't grab his throat. She froze, trembling horror carved into her features. "It's all right," he said softly. "No." She shook, pulling her knees up. "You don't understand. You can't. Then tell me." Her breathing hitched, ragged, uneven. She looked at him, eyes hollow. "They used helmets. Devices wired into our heads. It makes you someone else. You're still in there watching, but you can't stop. Your body obeys orders, kills, destroys while you scream inside." Ethan's mouth went dry. "That's what they did to you?" She nodded. "They called me S9. Said I was a failure, too wild, couldn't be conditioned. So they sold me." Her laugh was brittle. "Expected me to kill whoever bought me." That was the test. Ethan stared, chest heavy. "But you didn't." Her eyes softened just barely. "No, because you didn't look at me like I was broken." Silence filled the room, thick alive. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, close enough she could shove him away if she wanted. "You're not a weapon," he said. "Not property. You're you." Her eyes glistened in the dim light. She whispered, "Thank you." And for the first time, her voice carried something warmer than steel. 3 weeks passed, and life bent into a strange rhythm. Fences stood repaired. Garden-weeded corrals strengthened. Clara worked as though the land had been waiting for her. But always shadows lingered. Ethan saw her scars clearer now across her arms, jawline, hands. He heard her pacing at night, the rhythm restless like a soldier trapped in barracks. And still he found himself glancing at her more often than he meant to. Watching her lean on the fence as the stallion nuzzled her hand, seeing her shoulders ease when the sun sank over the ridge, noting the flicker of a smile she never meant him to catch. The ranch didn't feel empty anymore, but the silence of peace broke at noon under a sky too bright for comfort. Dust rose on the eastern trail, a buggy black polish drawn by sleek bay horses. Too fine for these parts. Ethan climbed from the shed roof, pistol already heavy in his hand. "Clara," he called. She appeared from the barn, eyes narrowing on the plume of dust. She moved to stand just behind him where she could see everything and move if needed. The buggy pulled up, wheels crunching. A man stepped down. Tall, immaculate, gray suit, pressed vest, gleaming gloves white despite the dust. A gold chain glinted across his chest. He smiled, removing his hat. "Mr. Hale, I presume Ethan didn't move." "That's right. You're a long way from home, mister." "Indeed," the man said smoothly. "Harrison Vale at your service. I believe you have something of mine." Ethan's stomach nodded. He didn't answer. Vale's eyes shifted, settling on Clara. Subject S9. Clara's body went rigid. "Her name is Clara," Ethan said, voice hard. "And she's not property." Vale smiled like a blade. "I beg to differ." He withdrew a folded document embossed and notarized. "I purchased her directly from the Phoenix Corporation. She was already spoken for when you bought her at that farce of an auction." Ethan didn't reach for the paper. "She's not yours." Vale's eyes cooled. "Then you have a problem, Mr. Hale." He replaced his hat with practiced calm. "I'll be back with men who fix problems." The buggy turned, wheels grinding, leaving a trail of dust in its wake. Ethan exhaled slowly, turned to Clara. Her face was a mask, but her eyes, those storm gray eyes, burned with fire. "I told you," she said quietly. "They'd come." Ethan holstered his pistol. "Then we better be ready." She nodded once, sharp as a blade. "Good." The ranch would not sleep that night, and Ethan knew the storm was finally at their door. The air grew heavy as dusk bled across the sky, every gust of wind carrying the weight of hoofbeats that hadn't yet arrived. Ethan stood on the porch rifle across his lap, watching the horizon darken. His hands moved with old familiarity, checking the chamber, oiling the barrel. Beside him, Clara oiled the hinges of the back gate so it wouldn't creak, her movement steady, methodical. They worked in silence, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was the silence of two people preparing for war. Inside the barn, lanterns were hung in deliberate patterns, meant to throw shadows, confuse eyes in the night. The horses were moved to the far pasture, safe from crossfire. Water troughs were filled, hay stacked high. Clara moved with an instinct Ethan couldn't match, her awareness sharper, her sense of strategy uncanny. "Been through this before?" he asked at one point, trying to mask the unease tightening his chest. Clara glanced at him, gray eyes cutting through the dim light. "You don't survive Phoenix without learning how to fight shadows." Ethan nodded, throat dry. He wanted to ask more, but he let it die there. Some truths came too raw to pry open with words. By the time stars pierced the sky, every preparation they could think of was done. The ranch looked ordinary enough to a passerby, but every gate, every lantern, every weapon was placed with purpose. They sat by the embers of a small fire near the porch. Clara's face flickered between light and dark, her profile carved sharp against the night. She stared into the flames, her jaw set. "I won't let them take me," she said finally, voice low but unyielding. Ethan leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "They'll have to go through me first." Her eyes found his searching wane. For a long moment, the only sound was the crack of burning wood. Then with a strange softness, she reached out and touched his arm. It was the first time she'd initiated contact. "Wake me in 4 hours," she murmured. "You need rest too." Ethan nodded, though he wasn't sure sleep would come. He watched her stride toward the bunkhouse, her shadow long in the lamplight. Something stirred deep in his chest, a feeling he hadn't allowed in years. When she was gone, the ranch felt different. Not empty, not lonely, but charged, like the ground itself waited for thunder. The thunder came at 11:53 by Ethan's pocket watch. 6 riders, 2 wagons, and Vale seated high in his polished black coat on the lead bench. They approached in practice formation, hands close to their weapons. The wagons rattled with hidden weight. Ethan's breath slowed, steadying his aim. Clara stood in the corral, her hand resting lightly on the stallion's neck, grounding him, grounding herself. The riders fanned out a semicircle across the yard. Vale dismounted, brushing dust from his sleeve as though even the land's dirt had no right to touch him. "I gave you time," he called, voice carrying sharp in the night. "More than you deserved." Clara stepped forward from the corral gate, closed behind her. "You're not taking me." Vale's lips curved. "You belong to me, bought and paid for." Her voice cut clean through the air. "I was born free, and I'll die that way." The words struck like hammer blows. Vale's hand flicked. One rider stepped forward, tarnished star pinned to his vest, a deputy from a town Ethan knew 2 days east. Dirty badge, dirtier loyalty. This man harbors stolen property, Vale said coldly. That's a crime, the deputy sneered. Then maybe he'll recognize my bullet. His hand dropped toward his holster. The shot didn't come from him. It came from the bunkhouse roof. Smoke curled and one rider screamed, his shoulder torn open. Chaos erupted. Ethan fired, deliberate and precise, aiming not to kill but to disarm. 2 rifles clattered to the dirt. Clara moved like a ghost with teeth. She darted from cover to cover, retrieved a fallen weapon, and slid it across the dirt toward Ethan with perfect aim. Vale didn't flinch. He watched as if this were an experiment, unfolding, his hands folded neatly. When a second of his men fell screaming, he raised one gloved hand. Enough, he commanded. Surprisingly, the riders obeyed, falling back into defensive lines. Ethan's chest rose and fell hard. His rifle stayed steady. Leave, and don't come back. Vale sighed like a man disappointed in business. Name your price, Mr. Hale. Whatever you paid for her, I'll triple it. She's not for sale. Everything has a price. Vale's eyes narrowed. And if money won't persuade you? He nodded to a man at the edge. The man struck a match, tossed it onto a bale of hay. Flames leapt high. Another man grabbed a torch, moving toward the bunkhouse. Ethan fired, kicking dirt at the man's boots. Next one goes through your knee. Clara didn't wait. Barefoot, she sprinted across the gravel, seized the flaming bale with bare hands, and hurled it into the water trough. Steam hissed into the night. Vale's mask cracked. He leaned forward, eyes bright with fascination. Remarkable, he murmured. The enhancements worked after all. Then louder voice, sharp as a whip, S9 report. Clara froze. Her body went rigid, shoulders locked. For a breathless second, Ethan thought she might obey, that some conditioning had sunk deeper than even she realized. Then she turned. Her eyes blazed hotter than the dying fire. My name, she said, each word, a knife, is Clara. Vale's composure shattered. He drew a pistol, hand shaking for the first time. If I can't have you, no one will. Ethan fired. The bullet tore through Vale's arm, the pistol flying. He howled, clutching the wound, fury twisting his face. Get off my land, Ethan said, voice level as death. All of you, now! The men didn't wait for permission. They gathered their wounded, abandoned a wagon, 3 horses, and half their courage in the yard. Vale was dragged into the buggy, his face white with rage. This isn't over, he screamed as they wheeled away. Phoenix doesn't lose what belongs to it. Ethan didn't lower his rifle until the dust cloud disappeared over the eastern ridge. Only then did he turn. Clara stood by the water trough, soot streaking her arms, one sleeve scorched. She didn't speak. Ethan crossed the yard, seized her wrists, turned her palms up. Blisters rose, angry and red. You could have been killed, he rasped. His throat tightened with an emotion he hadn't named in years. Clara looked at their hands, then at him. I didn't want to lose my home, she whispered. Not again. The word hung between them, simple, impossible. Home. Ethan swallowed hard, releasing her wrists slowly. Let's get those burns cleaned up, he said gruffly. But his hands trembled long after. That night the ranch was quiet again. But the silence felt changed. Not peace, not safety. It was the silence before the next storm. The sky turned pale gray before Ethan finally stirred from the chair where he'd sat guard all night. His rifle rested across his lap, his boots planted firm on the porch, but his eyes stung with grit. He hadn't closed them once. Every shadow had seemed alive. Every owl call, every wind-rustled branch had carried the echo of hoofbeats. But the yard was empty now, the tracks of Vale's retreat carved deep into the dust like scars across the land. Ethan rose joints stiff and crossed the yard. Clara was already awake, though he doubted she'd slept at all. She stood by the pump water, pouring over her burned hands, steam rising where the chill touched blistered flesh. Her hair hung damp against her shoulders, and her jaw was set hard against the pain. You should have wrapped those last night, Ethan muttered, reaching for the bucket. Clara's eyes flicked to him. I've had worse. Doesn't mean you should carry it alone. He pulled a clean cloth from his pocket, one he'd torn from an old shirt, and gently pressed it to her palms. She didn't flinch, but her gaze softened barely. Thank you, she said, her voice almost inaudible. Ethan tied the cloth with careful hands, slower than needed, as if delaying the moment when he'd have to let her go. By midday, the ranch looked deceptively calm. Chickens clucked in the coop, the stallion pawed the ground, the wind carried the scent of sage. But tension lingered like the memory of smoke. They worked without speaking much. Ethan hammered new boards across the south fence, every strike of the mallet echoing like a war drum. Clara carried water, stacked wood-checked supplies. At one point, Ethan caught her staring at the ridge where the buggy had vanished. Her eyes burned like a storm gathering. "They'll come back," she said quietly. Ethan nodded. "I know." Her shoulders straightened. "Then we make ready." He studied her, this woman who had been chained, sold, hunted, and saw not fear but resolve. For the first time since Vale had appeared, hope edged into his chest. That night, as stars blanketed the sky, Ethan built a fire outside the crackle, warming the chill. Clara sat opposite him, bandaged hands resting on her knees, eyes fixed on the flames. "You want to tell me?" he asked, voice low. She didn't look up. "Tell you what Phoenix really is." For a long moment she said nothing. The fire popped, sending sparks spiraling into the dark. Then she spoke words flat, carved from memory. "They don't just buy and sell people. They make them." Ethan frowned. "Make them. They take children. Orphans, the unwanted. They cut inject wire. They break you down, then rebuild you into something else. Stronger, faster, less human." She lifted her sleeve, revealing scars that crisscrossed her forearm in strange, unnatural patterns. "They call them enhancements. I call them shackles." Ethan's stomach turned. "And I was one of their projects." Subject 9. She met his eyes, unflinching. "Too wild," they said. "Couldn't be broken. Their device never worked right on me." "The helmet." She nodded. "They put it on. You lose yourself. You can still see, still think, but you can't stop what they make you do. You watch your hands kill. You watch your mouth obey. You watch yourself disappear." Her voice cracked just once. She caught it quick steel snapping back into place. "They sold me because I wouldn't bend. Expected me to slaughter the one who bought me. A final test. I didn't." Ethan exhaled, chest tight. Why not? Clara's gaze softened, the storm in her eyes breaking for a moment. "Because you didn't look at me like I was a weapon." Silence pressed close. Ethan wanted to reach across the fire, wanted to take her hand, but he held back. Instead, he said, "You're not what they made you. You're more." Her lips parted, then closed. Finally, she whispered, "Maybe." And for the first time, Ethan thought he saw the faintest crack in the walls she had built. 3 weeks passed heavy with watchfulness. Clara healed faster than Ethan thought possible. Her burns faded. Her strength returned, and each day she worked with the stallion until the animal not only allowed her touch, but carried her weight across the yard. Ethan watched both amazed and unsettled. Whatever Phoenix had done, it left marks deeper than scars. But the ranch thrived. Fences stood firm, the garden grew, the chickens fattened. At night they shared quiet meals and sometimes sat on the porch saying nothing, listening to the crickets and the sigh of the wind. And though danger loomed, Ethan found himself imagining just for a heartbeat that this could be something like peace. Until the day the buggy returned. It came at noon, sun high and merciless shadows sharp against the earth. Ethan saw the dust first. He set down his hammer, his hand going to his pistol. Clara. She was at his side instantly, eyes locked on the rising plume. The buggy rolled closer, sleek and black as before. Vale sat inside, his arm bound in a sling, his face pale but his smile venomous. He didn't dismount this time. He raised his voice from the bench. "Mr. Hale? A pleasure, though I admit I'm surprised you still breathe." Ethan stood firm, Clara at his side. "You weren't welcome the first time. You're less welcome now." Vale chuckled. "Charming. But you see, I'm a patient man, and patient men always collect what is owed." His gaze slid to Clara. Subject 9. Phoenix doesn't forget. Clara's jaw clenched, but she didn't speak. Vale leaned forward, eyes glittering. "I will return, and when I do, you will wish you had sold her." The buggy wheeled around, leaving the same scars across the land as before. Ethan's hand hovered near his pistol long after it disappeared. Clara whispered, "They're building something." Ethan nodded grimly. "Then so will we." The storm hadn't passed, it had only drawn closer, and when it broke, Ethan knew nothing would be the same. The night after Vale's second visit stretched long and restless. Every creak of timber in the house, every whisper of wind across the eaves seemed sharper, heavier. Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the ranch pressing down on him. Clara hadn't gone to the bunkhouse. She stayed near the barn, walking the perimeter until dawn, her silhouette cutting against the stars like a sentinel carved of iron. Ethan knew she didn't trust sleep. Not now. When the first light crept over the horizon, he found her standing by the corral, her gray eyes fixed on the stallion. The animal paced nervously, tossing its head, as if sensing the storm that lingered unseen. Clara stroked its muzzle with a steady hand, her voice soft. Calming meant as much for herself as for the beast. "You two have something in common," Ethan said, quietly stepping to the fence. Clara turned her head slightly. "What's that?" "Both too wild for anyone to break, but not too wild to choose." She studied him, her gaze unreadable. Then she returned her attention to the stallion. "Breaking things isn't the only way to make them useful. Sometimes you respect them and they respect you back." The words lingered. Ethan wondered if she meant only the horse. Later that morning, Ethan busied himself with repairs, anything to keep his hands moving. Clara joined him, carrying lumber with ease that startled him every time. He'd seen strong men falter under half the weight she bore without complaint. But when she bent to lift another post, her shirt sleeve shifted, revealing more of the strange scars that webbed her skin. Ethan paused, hammer halfway to the nail. "They did that to you?" he asked softly. Clara's head lifted, eyes narrowing, the question slicing too close. For a long moment he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she pulled the fabric down to hide the marks. "They call themselves Phoenix," she said flatly. "They don't just take people. They remake them. Soldiers who don't feel fear don't question orders. I was one of their mistakes." Ethan's jaw tightened. "They call mistakes what they can't control." Clara's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Something like that. For the rest of the morning, silence fell again. But it was different now, heavier, with truths half-spoken. That night, sleep broke Clara before it broke Ethan. Her scream ripped across the yard like a blade. He bolted, upright rifle in hand, sprinting to the bunkhouse. Inside, he found her thrashing, drenched in sweat, eyes squeezed shut against horrors unseen. "No, not the device, please, not again," Clara, Ethan shouted, setting the rifle aside and reaching for her shoulder. The reaction was instant, violent. Her eyes snapped open, and before he could blink, her hand clamped around his throat. Fingers like iron dug deep, choking his breath. "Clara," he gasped, clawing at her wrist. Recognition flickered in her storm-gray eyes. She released him, scrambling back against the wall, horror flooding her features. I didn't mean to." Her voice broke. Ethan rubbed his throat, drawing slow breaths. "It's all right. My fault. Shouldn't have touched you like that." Clara curled in on herself, knees to her chest, arms wrapped tight. In the dim lamplight, Ethan could see the scars on her arms clearer than ever, patterns burned, carved, etched into flesh. He forced himself not to flinch. "Who did that to you?" he asked, voice low, careful. Her eyes went distant. "People who think they can own others. Phoenix. They wanted soldiers without mercy. I was subject 9. Too wild, too stubborn. They said I was broken, but not in the way they wanted." Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, leaving space between them. "You want to tell me more?" Her silence stretched so long he thought she'd shut him out. Then with a trembling breath she spoke. "They use a helmet, a device. It rewires you. You're still in there, but you can't stop yourself. You watch as your body obeys, kills, obeys, and you can't scream loud enough to break free." Her hand lifted, tracing the scar near her temple. "They put it on me dozens of times. I fought every time. Too wild, they said. So they sold me." Ethan's chest ached, rage boiling low. "Sold you like livestock." Clara's eyes met his, fierce, unbroken. "They expected me to kill the man who bought me. But I didn't. Not you." For the first time since her scream, the tension broke. "Why not me?" Ethan asked quietly. "Because you saw a person. Not a weapon." Her words fell between them like fragile glass. Neither moved for a long time. Finally, Ethan whispered, You're not theirs, Clara. You never were. And as long as I breathe, you never will be again. Something shifted in her expression. Not trust. Not yet. But maybe the beginning of it. 3 days passed in uneasy calm. Clara worked with the stallion until it allowed her to saddle it, her hand steady on its flank as if binding them both. Ethan watched, caught between awe and dread. Then, just before noon on the 4th day, a dust plume rose on the horizon. Vale returned. The polished buggy gleamed drawn by sleek bay horses. His arm was bound, but his smile was colder than before. He didn't dismount this time. He sat tall, voice cutting across the yard. Mr. Hale, you're playing a dangerous game. Ethan stood on the porch, Clara at his side. The only game is you thinking people are property. Vale's smile thinned. I'll be back. And when I return, I won't come with offers. I'll come with fire. The buggy wheeled away the horses, kicking up dust, leaving the promise of war in their wake. Clara's hands clenched at her sides. Her voice was steady, but her eyes burned. They won't stop. Not until Phoenix takes me back, or until we burn them down first. Ethan nodded grimly. The storm was no longer a shadow. It was a certainty, and it was coming fast. The ranch wore an uneasy quiet in the days that followed Vale's second visit. The chickens scratched in the yard. The stallion snorted and pawed at the corral. The wind sighed through the dry grass. But beneath every sound lay another, an absence, a warning. Ethan moved through his chores like a man sharpening a blade, each task deliberate, each glance toward the horizon heavy with expectation. Clara matched his vigilance. She rose before dawn, worked until the sun fell, then patrolled long after dark. Sometimes Ethan caught her standing at the edge of the property, head tilted as if listening to some frequency only she could hear. They're close, she said one evening, voice low. Ethan set down his hammer, wiping sweat from his brow. How do you know? Clara's gray eyes flicked toward the east. I can feel it. Pressure in the air. Like before a storm. Ethan didn't doubt her. Too much of what she'd said, what she'd shown, had already proven true. He tightened the last nail on the barn door. Then we prepare. The next morning, Ethan dragged an old chest from beneath the floorboards of the main house. Dust rose as he pried it open, coughing on the years it had slept. Inside lay his past 2 pistols, a shotgun, a pouch of ammunition, and a knife worn smooth by war. Clara stepped into the room, pausing at the sight. You fought, she said softly. Ethan nodded, lifting the shotgun. Union scout. I spent most of the war behind enemy lines. Her gaze lingered on him. That's why you move the way you do. He didn't answer. He simply handed her one of the pistols. Ever used one, Clara turned the weapon in her hand with a familiarity that chilled him. She checked the chamber, tested the weight, and slid it into her belt. Yes, she said, nothing more. They worked side by side that day, readying the land. Clara positioned lanterns along the corral, not for light, but for misdirection. If they come at night, these will make them think you've got men stationed there. Ethan oiled the hinges on the back gate, ensuring silence. We'll need escape routes. Horses ready, supplies packed. Already done, Clara replied. Her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she shifted barrels to form cover. As the sun dipped low, painting the land in blood-red hues, Ethan leaned against the barn, watching her. Sweat streaked her face, hair sticking to her skin, but her movements never slowed. You've done this before, he said finally. Clara paused, looking at him across the yard. I've survived before. Their eyes locked in the fading light, and Ethan felt a truth settle heavy between them. Whatever Phoenix had made her endure, she had become stronger than anything they'd intended, and yet beneath that strength he glimpsed something else. Loneliness. Wounds that no scar could show. That night they sat by the fire again. The stars wheeled overhead, the air sharp with sage. Clara cradled a tin cup, not drinking, only holding the warmth. Do you ever wonder, she said quietly, what life might have been if they hadn't taken you where they did? Ethan stared into the flames. Every day. She looked at him, her eyes searching. And what do you see? He swallowed. A brother still alive, a family not buried, a ranch filled with hands instead of silence. The fire popped, scattering sparks. Clara turned back to the flames, her voice even softer. For me, I wonder if I'd still know how to laugh. Ethan's chest tightened. He set his cup aside. You will again. Her lips parted as if to argue, but instead she whispered, maybe. 3 nights later, the warning came. Ethan woke to the stallion's frantic snorts, hooves pounding the corral dirt. He grabbed his rifle, rushing to the porch. Clara was already there, hair loose around her shoulders, eyes locked on the horizon. Riders, she said, voice like steel. Ethan squinted into the dark. A smear of dust, faint even in the starlight, rolled across the eastern ridge. How many? Her jaw clenched. Too many. The stallion reared, sensing what its riders could not yet see. Ethan chambered around, the click loud in the silence. Then we stand. Clara turned to him, her eyes blazing with something fierce and unbreakable. No, she said. We fight. The words cut through the night like a vow. And Ethan knew whatever came, whatever Phoenix brought, they would face it together. The dawn broke uneasy, heavy with heat and silence. The kind of silence that pressed down on the land, smothering birdsong, stilling even the insects. Ethan stood on the porch, rifle in hand, scanning the horizon where the dust had risen hours before. Clara emerged from the barn, her long stride deliberate, her gray eyes sharper than the edge of a blade. She had tied her hair back, the wild mane subdued, but not tamed, never tamed. She carried herself like someone walking into a storm she'd met before. They'll come by midday, she said simply. They want the sun at their back. Ethan nodded grimly. Then we'll be ready. They spent the morning in wordless labor. Ethan checked the ammunition, laying cartridges in neat rows across the table, the metallic glint catching the light. Clara arranged barricades from barrels and fence rails, each position calculated with soldiers' precision. Lanterns here, she instructed, pointing toward the corral. If they attack in the dark, the shadows will confuse them. Ethan lifted a heavy sack of grain to reinforce the barn wall. His muscles ached, but the ache steadied him. It gave him something to hold besides fear. Clara paused, watching him. You've done this before. War, he said, the word falling heavy. Her gaze lingered a moment longer. So have I. Different war, same scars. The silence between them thickened with unspoken things, pain memory, kinship forged by survival. At noon, the horizon moved. 6 riders fanned out across the ridge, flanking 2 wagons. Dust rose in their wake, curling like smoke. Behind them came the polished buggy veil perched atop black coat, gleaming. He hadn't lied. He'd brought fire with him. The riders drew closer, rifles resting across saddles. The wagons creaked under their load shapes, covered with tarps that shifted with the motion. And behind it all, Vale sat like a conductor before an orchestra, ready to draw chaos from order. Ethan's hand tightened on his rifle. Beside him, Clara's breath slowed, her body loose, coiled like the stallion before a sprint. Not yet, she murmured, watching the riders descend. Let them make the first move. The buggy stopped 50 yards out. Vale stepped down with careful elegance, brushing dust from his gloves. He looked utterly out of place in the wild, like a crow preening in a battlefield. Mr. Hale, he called, his voice smooth as polished glass. You've had your time. Ethan didn't move from the porch. This is my land. You're trespassing. Vale smiled thinly. I believe you have something of mine. Subject 9. Clara's chin lifted. My name is Clara, she called back, and I don't belong to you. Vale's gaze flicked to her interest gleaming in his cold eyes. Stubborn. Remarkable, really. The conditioning didn't break you yet. Here you stand still, tethered to me. Clara's voice sharpened, cutting through the heat. You forged the chains. I broke them. A ripple moved through Vale's men, discomfort stirring in their ranks. Vale ignored it. His smile faltered, the first crack in his polished mask. You'll regret this defiance, he said softly. He nodded to one of the riders. The man struck a match, lit a torch, and tossed it into the dry hay stacked by the barn. Flames leapt instantly, orange tongues devouring straw smoke, spiraling high. Ethan raised his rifle. One shot rang out, splitting the air. The torchbearer stumbled, the dirt at his feet exploding as the bullet struck inches from his boots. He froze. Next one goes through your knee, Ethan said, his voice calm, deadly. For the first time, Vale's composure slipped entirely. His lips thinned, fury flaring in his eyes. Enough games. Take her. The riders spurred forward. Chaos ignited. Clara moved first faster than any of them could track. She darted to the roofline of the bunkhouse where she'd stashed a rifle, and within seconds one of Vale's men toppled from his saddle, his weapon clattering to the dirt. Ethan fired steadily from the port shots, precise, disarming rather than killing. Bullets struck rifles, forcing men to scramble. The barn fire roared higher, crackling like laughter. Clara vaulted from the roof, rolled, and snatched up the fallen rifle, sliding it across the dirt to Ethan's boots. "Reload!" she shouted. Vale watched, not flinching, as his men fell into chaos. Instead, he studied Clara with something between fascination and rage. Then he raised his voice sharp as a whip. Subject 9, report. The command cut the air. Clara froze. Her body stiffened, her back rigid. For one terrible heartbeat, Ethan thought she would obey. Vale's smile returned cruel, triumphant. But then Clara turned fire-blazing in her storm-gray eyes. "My name," she said, each word, a hammer blow, "is Clara Sullivan." The stallion screamed in the corral hooves, striking the rails. Clara's defiance echoed across the yard, shaking more than Vale's control. It rattled the very men he commanded. Ethan fired against smoke curling from the barrel. "You heard her," he said, his voice low, steady, final. "She doesn't belong to you." Vale's mask cracked fully now, his fury spilling across his face. He snatched a pistol from his coat, aiming at Clara. The shot came, but it wasn't his. Ethan's rifle barked first. The pistol flew from Vale's hand, clattering harmlessly into the dust. The yard fell still, the fire snapping the only sound. Ethan levered another round into his chamber, his eyes locked on Vale. "Get off my land." Vale clutched his bleeding arm, hatred twisting his features. He backed toward his buggy, his men hesitating until his voice broke like thunder. "This isn't over. Phoenix doesn't lose what belongs to it." He was half dragged into the buggy, his polished coat torn, his dignity shredded. The riders gathered the wounded and retreated, dust rising as they disappeared over the ridge. Only when they were gone did Ethan lower his rifle. His hands trembled not from fear but from the weight of what had just begun. Clara stood by the water trough, soot smearing her face, her sleeves singed. Her chest rose and fell steady, unbroken. Ethan crossed to her, taking her wrists gently, turning her palms upward. The skin was red and blistering. "You could have been killed," he said, his throat tight. Clara looked down at their joined hands, then up at him. "I didn't want to lose my home," she whispered. "Not again." The word home hung between them, fragile, unspoken, until now. And Ethan knew, as surely as he knew the weight of the rifle in his hands, that the war wasn't finished. Vale would come again. Phoenix would come. But they would not find the same woman they had once chained. They would find Clara. And they would have to go through Ethan Hale to reach her. The smoke clung to the ranch long after Vale and his men had vanished. The barn still smoldered, though Clara had dragged the burning bales into the water trough before the fire could spread. The air was acrid sharp in their throats, heavy in their clothes. Ethan poured water down the scorched boards, his shoulders aching with every motion. Clara stood barefoot in the dust, her palms bandaged, her eyes fixed on the ridge where the riders had disappeared. She hadn't moved since the last echo of hooves faded. "They'll be back," she said finally, her voice low, almost detached. Ethan leaned the bucket against the barn, wiped his brow. "I know. They won't make the same mistake twice. Next time they'll bring more men. More fire." Ethan stepped closer, reading the tension in her shoulders, the battle still raging inside her. "Then we'll be ready." Clara turned sharply. Storm-gray eyes locking onto his. "Ready. Do you hear yourself? Vale isn't just a man with hired guns. He's a hand of Phoenix. And Phoenix doesn't let go. Not ever." Ethan met her gaze unflinching. "Then they'll learn that some things can't be owned." For a moment she searched his face as if weighing the truth of his words. Then she exhaled a long, trembling breath. "You don't understand," she whispered. "They built me to obey. They carved it into my skin. Even when I resist, the command still lingers." She touched her temple where a faint scar traced through her hairline. "It's a fight every day just to stay myself." Ethan reached out, resting a hand on her shoulder, steady grounding. "Then we fight it every day. Together." Clara blinked surprise, flickering across her face. She didn't answer, but the rigid set of her jaw eased, if only slightly. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat by the kitchen table, the shotgun resting across his knees, the lamp throwing long shadows on the walls. The ranch, once a place of solitude, now felt like a fortress waiting to be stormed. Every creak of wood, every distant howl of coyote set his nerves on edge. Across the yard, a faint light glowed from the bunkhouse window. Clara was awake too. He rose, stepped out into the cool night, and crossed the dirt. The door was ajar. Inside, Clara sat on the edge of her narrow bed boots on shoulders hunched. She was carving a piece of wood with a knife, each stroke deliberate, controlled, almost violent. She didn't look up when he entered. "Can't sleep, neither can you," he said. She gave a soft, humorless laugh. "Sleep means dreams. I'd rather not." Ethan leaned against the wall, watching the shavings fall at her feet. "What are you making?" Clara turned the piece of wood in her hands. It was rough, half-shaped into the form of a horse. "The stallion. Something to hold on to," she murmured. Her fingers tightened around it until her knuckles whitened. "Clara," Ethan said quietly, "whatever they did to you, whatever they tried to make you, you're not theirs. You're not broken." Her knife stilled. For the first time, her eyes met his in the dim light. There was no defiance there, only raw, unguarded pain. "You say that," she whispered, "but you don't know what I've done." Ethan pushed off the wall, crossed the small room, and knelt before her. He took the carving gently from her hand, set it aside, then held her gaze. "I know enough," he said, "and I know you're more than what they wanted you to be." The silence between them deepened heavy, with things unsaid. Finally, Clara exhaled, a shaky laugh escaping her lips. "You're a stubborn man, Ethan Hale." He allowed himself the faintest smile. "Takes one to know one." The days that followed were a blur of work and waiting. They repaired the barn, reinforced the fences, stockpiled supplies. Ethan taught Clara the ranch's hidden paths, the gullies that could hide a rider, the dry creek beds that led to the hills. She in turn taught him tactics, how to read the land as a battlefield, how to move silent as shadow, how to set traps with little more than rope and steel. The ranch became both home and stronghold, every task another thread woven into their fragile alliance. Yet beneath the routine pulsed an unspoken truth. Vale's promise hung over them like a storm cloud. Phoenix would return, and when they did, it would not be with torches and threats. It would be with precision, with cruelty, with the weight of an empire that believed itself untouchable. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, Clara stood by the corral, stroking the stallion's dark mane. Ethan joined her, resting his arms on the rail. "He trusts you now," Ethan said. Clara's lips curved faintly. "Not because I broke him, because I respected him." Her eyes slid to Ethan Gray, meeting blue in the fading light. "That's how you treat me too. Not as property, not as weapon, as person." The word caught in her throat, foreign on her tongue. Ethan's voice was steady. "Because that's what you are." The stallion huffed, nudging Clara's shoulder. She laid her hand against its muzzle, but her eyes never left Ethan's. For the first time since she had arrived, something in her gaze softened, fragile, dangerous, but real. The peace lasted 3 weeks. Then one night the chickens shrieked. Ethan bolted upright, rifle in hand, before thought caught up. He rushed to the porch, scanning the yard. A figure lay collapsed by the coop. Small, fragile. He sprinted across the dirt, heart hammering. It wasn't an animal, it was a boy. No more than 12. Clothes, torn skin, striped with whip marks. His breath shallow, his body trembling. Clara appeared at Ethan's side, barefoot, eyes wide. When she saw the child, she dropped to her knees. "Help me," she said quickly. "Get him inside." Ethan lifted the boy into his arms, stunned by how little he weighed. The child whimpered, too weak even to cry out. Inside, Clara cleared the table with one sweep, ordering Ethan to lay the boy down. She fetched bandages, water, anything within reach. Ethan pressed a cloth to one of the deeper wounds, his hands steady, though his chest shook. "He's barely alive." Clara's expression was grim-haunted. "He's from Phoenix." Ethan froze. "How do you know?" She pulled up the boy's sleeve. Etched into his arm were scars, patterns like the ones crisscrossing her own. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I know their work." The boy stirred his lips, forming broken words. Numbers, codes, fragments of orders. Ethan and Clara exchanged a look that carried the weight of certainty. Phoenix was closer than they had thought, and they had just brought its nightmare to their door. The boy's fever raged through the night. His body burned hot against the cool compresses Clara pressed to his skin, sweat soaking through the bandages that covered his lashes of torn flesh. Every so often he mumbled incoherently, strings of numbers, commands, and phrases Ethan didn't understand, but which made Clara's jaw tighten, as though each syllable was a blade cutting into her memory. Ethan sat across from her at the table, his rifle leaning within arm's reach. He hadn't left the boy's side since they carried him in. The lamp sputtered shadows crawling along the walls, but neither of them blinked at the darkness. "He's marked," Clara said finally, her voice a rasp more statement than revelation. She drew back the boy's tattered shirt, revealing a brand etched into his shoulder, a phoenix small but precise with the designation 17D beneath it. Ethan stared, his stomach twisting. "So they tag children like cattle now?" Clara nodded grimly. "He's one of theirs. I've seen it before." The boy whimpered, clutching weakly at the sheet. Clara brushed damp hair from his forehead, the gesture tender, protective. For a moment her storm-gray eyes softened, and Ethan saw not the hardened fighter, but the wounded woman who recognized herself in this broken child. "Why him?" Ethan asked. "Why send a child into this wilderness half dead?" Clara shook her head slowly. "He didn't come from them. He escaped." That word carried more weight than any bullet. By morning the fever broke, though the boy remained pale and weak, his breath shallow but steadier. Clara brewed a broth from what little meat they had left, coaxing spoonfuls between his cracked lips. When his eyes finally fluttered open, they were wide and haunted the eyes of someone who had seen too much. He tried to speak, but his voice came out as a rasp. "Don't push yourself," Clara murmured. The boy blinked, his gaze darting between them. Finally he whispered, "You're the giant." Clara stilled. "What did you say?" "You're the giant," the boy repeated faintly, a shadow of a smile tugging his lips. "They said you were dead, that you failed, and they destroyed you." Clara's breath caught. She leaned in, her voice steady but low. "What's your name?" The boy swallowed, voice shaking. "Gabe! Gabe." Clara repeated, testing the name like it was something fragile. "You're safe here. This is Ethan's ranch. You've made it far from Phoenix." At the mention of Phoenix, Gabe flinched, eyes darting toward the door, the windows. "They'll come," he whispered. "They always come." Ethan crouched so the boy could see him. His voice was firm, reassuring. "Not here. Not while I'm standing." Gabe studied him warily, the kind of look a child gave when he'd learned not to trust too easily. After a long moment he nodded faintly and let Clara press another spoonful of broth to his lips. Over the next days, Gabe's strength returned in fragments. He moved with the stiffness of someone punished far too often, his back a map of scars. He spoke little, but when he did, it was enough to chill both Ethan and Clara to their core. "They were going to put the device on me," Gabe whispered one evening as Clara cleaned his wounds. "Said I wasn't ready. Said I was resisting too much. But I saw what it did to the others." He touched the back of his neck unconsciously. Clara froze, her fingers hovering over his skin. She knew too well what he meant. "The helmet?" she asked. Gabe nodded, eyes wide. "It makes you not you anymore. Like your body's a puppet and you just watch while it moves without you." Ethan's jaw tightened. He had thought he'd heard the worst of Phoenix's sins, but every word Gabe spoke dug the blade deeper. Clara kept her voice even. "You ran." Gabe nodded again. "They tried to stop me. I don't remember how I got away. Just pain, and then I was in the dark running. I thought I'd die out there. Maybe I should have." Clara gripped his chin gently, forcing his eyes to meet hers. "No," she said firmly. "You survived. That means something." For a heartbeat, silence hung heavy. Then Gabe whispered, "They'll come for me." Clara's voice dropped to steel. "Let them." That night, Ethan sat alone on the porch, the stars cold and sharp overhead. The boy's words wouldn't leave him. "They'll come." He thought of Vale of Phoenix, of the files Clara had spoken of, the endless scars carved into her body. He thought of his brother Thomas, whose grave lay on the north ridge. Thomas had died chasing a steer, they'd said. But Ethan remembered now the strange letters his brother had sent in the months before his fall notes about missing children, strange men with badges from nowhere. A thought chilled him to the bone. What if Thomas hadn't fallen at all? What if Phoenix had silenced him because he'd stumbled too close to the truth? The screen door creaked behind him. Clara stepped onto the porch, her shadow long in the moonlight. "You don't sleep much," she said. Ethan shook his head. "Not when the world's on fire." Clara leaned against the railing beside him, close enough their shoulders brushed. "You're thinking about your brother," she said softly. Ethan looked at her sharply. "How do you—" "I saw his grave," she said simply, "and the guilt in your eyes when you speak his name." Ethan exhaled slowly, staring at the horizon. He was chasing cattle when the ground gave way. "That's the story I've told for years, but now—" His voice roughened. "Now I wonder if it wasn't an accident. He'd been writing me about missing children, about men with money and guns, and then he was gone." Clara's gray eyes glinted in the moonlight, not with pity, but with understanding. Phoenix doesn't leave witnesses. If he was asking questions, they made sure he never found answers. The truth hit Ethan like a rifle butt to the chest. His hands curled around the railing knuckles, white. "They killed him," he whispered. Clara's hand brushed his, a fleeting contact but grounding. "Then he didn't die for nothing. His questions brought you here. To me. To Gabe. And now maybe to stopping them." Ethan turned to her, caught in the steel and fire of her gaze. For the first time in years, his grief wasn't an anchor. It was fuel. "We'll burn them down," he said, his voice low, fierce. "For Thomas. For Gabe. For you." Clara nodded once. "Then we start with Marrow Gap." Ethan frowned. "Marrow Gap." "That's where Gabe came from," she explained. "An old mining camp Phoenix turned into a training ground. If we can find what's left there, maybe evidence, maybe others—" She hesitated, her voice softer. "It's where I was last taken before they sold me at Redemption Springs." The weight of her words settled between them. Ethan squeezed her hand firmly. "Then we go." The night air shifted, carrying the smell of sage and dust. Beyond the horizon, the land lay silent, waiting. But for Ethan Hale, Clara Sullivan, and a boy named Gabe, the silence was only the calm before the storm. The ranch no longer felt like home. It was a staging ground now, every corner sharpened into strategy, every tool reimagined as weapon, every fence line measured for defense or retreat. Ethan had lived most of his life working the land with rhythm and patience, but now every heartbeat felt like a countdown. 3 days after Gabe had first spoken of Marrow Gap, Clara made the decision aloud the way a commander might announce a campaign. "We can't stay here. Not with him. Phoenix will come, and when they do, they won't stop until the boy is dragged back in chains." Ethan didn't argue. His gut had been telling him the same. "Then we ride west," he said, tracing a crude map on the table. "Marrow Gap's near the canyon rim. If they used it as a camp, we'll find proof. Or graves." Clara's eyes hardened at the last word. "Both." Gabe, sitting at the far end of the table with a blanket wrapped around his shoulders, shivered. "There's more than graves," he whispered. "There are voices in those tunnels. Even when it's quiet, you hear them." Ethan exchanged a glance with Clara. Whatever waited at Marrow Gap, it wasn't only physical, it was a shadow etched deep into Gabe's bones. They spent a full day preparing. Ethan checked and rechecked the tack-tightened cinches laid out rifles and ammunition. Clara scavenged through every forgotten crate in the barn, selecting rope lanterns oil. Her movements were efficient, but Ethan could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hand lingered on the stallion's mane longer than necessary, like drawing strength from the animal's calm. When night fell, they gathered by the fire one last time before departure. The crackle of burning wood filled the silence between them. "You'll need to sleep," Ethan said to Clara. "Tomorrow will be long." "I'll sleep when we're safe," she replied, staring into the flames. Then softer, almost as if the words weren't meant to escape. "If such a thing exists." Gabe leaned against her side, his small frame dwarfed by her height, yet his eyes mirrored hers, gray and stormed by memory. "Are they still after me?" the boy asked. "They're after all of us now," Ethan said, his voice calm but unyielding. But that's their mistake. Clara laid an arm across Gabe's shoulders, pulling him closer. They made me too wild to break. They'll regret letting me live long enough to find you. The fire popped, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky like dying stars. They rode out at dawn. Ethan on his steady bay gelding, Clara astride the black stallion that had once defied every hand but hers, and Gabe on a gentle mare chosen for her even gait. The boy sat tall, despite his scars, a grim determination set into his young face. The land unfurled before them in long ridges and empty plains. Silence broken only by the rhythm of hooves and the creak of leather. The air smelled of dust and pine, the sun rising pale through the morning haze. Clara rode slightly ahead, scanning the horizon with an intensity that reminded Ethan of soldiers on patrol. Every rustle in the brush, every distant bird call seemed to draw her attention. "Feels too quiet," she murmured after an hour. Ethan's hand hovered near his rifle. "Quiet can be good. Or it means we're already being watched," she countered. Her words lingered, sinking into Ethan's bones. By midday they reached the high ridge that overlooked miles of rugged country. Below the canyon stretched in jagged veins, the earth torn open to reveal its darker heart. "That's the way Gabe said," pointing with a trembling hand. "Through there. To Marrow Gap." Ethan narrowed his eyes, studying the terrain. Not an easy trail. Clara's expression was unreadable. It was never meant to be. They descended carefully, the horses slipping on loose shale, the air growing cooler as shadows pooled between the canyon walls. The silence deepened until even the animals seemed reluctant to breathe. As they wound through the narrows, Gabe suddenly stiffened in his saddle. "They're near," Ethan turned sharply. "What do you mean?" The boy pressed a hand to his temple, grimacing. "I can feel it. The buzzing. Same as when they tracked me before." Clara's knuckles whitened on her reins, enhanced senses. They must have left something in him, some tether to find their runaways. Ethan swore under his breath. "Then we don't have time." We push through before they close in. They urged the horses forward, the canyon twisting tighter around them. Then faint, but unmistakable, came the echo of hooves behind. They reached a bend where the canyon widened briefly, exposing the skeletal remains of cabins long abandoned. Roofs, caved windows, shattered mining carts rusted in silence. Marrow Gap. But the place was not empty. At the far end of the square, a campfire smoldered, thin smoke spiraling upward. Figures moved in the shadows, too many to be chance travelers. Clara reined in sharply. Her hand went to her rifle. "Phoenix." Ethan scanned the ruins quickly. At least half a dozen men armed. More waiting unseen. It was a trap. "We should fall back," Ethan muttered. But Gabe's voice broke, urgent. "No, this is it. This is where they kept me." His eyes fixed on a dark opening in the rock beyond the cabins. The mine. "That's where the others are." Clara's gaze followed his trembling finger. For an instant, pain flickered across her features, recognition memory, the echo of her own captivity. She shook her head, storm eyes hardening into resolve. "No," she said. "We don't run. Not from this." Ethan gritted his teeth, weighing choices that carried only blood. The riders behind were closing fast. The men ahead were already watching, and between them lay the truth of Phoenix buried in the darkness of Marrow Gap. He glanced at Clara. Her jaw was set, her back straight, every line of her body radiating defiance. "All right," he said quietly. "Then we make our stand." The boy tightened his grip on the mare's reins, his voice thin but fierce. "I'll fight too." Ethan turned sharply. "No. You'll stay low. Do you hear me?" Gabe opened his mouth to protest, but Clara cut in her tone, unyielding. "You survive. That's your fight. Let us do the rest." The boy swallowed hard, then nodded. The canyon wind shifted, carrying the acrid scent of smoke and gun oil. The men in the square stirred rifles, glinting in the fading light. Ethan raised his weapon, heart-steady voice, quiet but certain. "Then let's show them what wild really means." The square at Marrow Gap was deathly still, the kind of silence that came not from peace, but from anticipation. The men ahead had stopped moving their rifles, slung casual, but their eyes alert, waiting to see which way the newcomers would break. Behind the faint rhythm of hooves echoed closer, more riders funneled into the canyon. Ethan's grip tightened around his rifle stock. He'd been in ambushes before during the war. He knew the sound of a trap when he heard one breathing. Too many, he muttered. We can't take them head on. Clara's storm gray eyes scanned the ruins, sharp and calculating. No, she agreed. But we can split them. Make the canyon fight for us. Her words carried the kind of certainty that steadied a man's spine. Ethan nodded once. What do you have in mind? Clara leaned forward, pointing subtly toward the mine entrance Gabe had indicated, a black mouth in the rock shadow, swallowing shadow. That's where they'll hurt us if we rush. But if we go willingly, they'll think we're cornered. Ethan finished, his mind already racing through the angles, and we turn it into a choke point. Gabe shifted in his saddle, fear and determination mingling in his young face. There are tunnels, I know them. Some dead ends, some lead deeper, but there's a back way out. Clara's hand brushed his shoulder, firm grounding. Then you guide us. Whatever happens, you stay between us. Do you hear? The boy nodded, though his jaw trembled. From the square, one of the Phoenix men finally called out his voice, a lazy drawl that barely masked the iron beneath. You're trespassing. Best turn around before you get hurt. Ethan raised his rifle slightly, letting the barrel catch the light. Funny. I was about to say the same. A ripple of movement answered him, rifles lifted, boots scuffing in the dust. The canyon behind thundered louder. No more time. Now Clara hissed. Ethan spurred his gelding forward, angling toward the mine. Clara flanked the other side, the black stallion's muscles bunching like coiled steel. Gabe's mare hesitated but followed, guided by Clara's sharp command. Shots cracked. Stone chips sprayed, the air filled with the stinging scent of powder. Ethan fired back once, not to kill, but to scatter, dropping a rifle from a man's hands. Clara's bullet sang truer, sparking off the wheel of a cart and sending the enemy ducking. They tore across the square, hooves pounding like war drums. Ethan caught flashes, men shouting, smoke curling, the mine yawning wider. Then they plunged into darkness. Inside, the air turned damp, heavy with the smell of earth and rust. Their horses' hooves clattered against old rails left from mining carts. Gabe's voice echoed ahead, urgent but clear. This way. There's a cavern up ahead. Behind them, pursuit followed. The sharp clang of boots on stone, the echo of curses and shouted orders. Lantern light bobbed in the blackness, growing closer. Move, Ethan barked. The tunnel widened suddenly into a cavern where timbers strained to hold the ceiling. Stalactites dripped slow water that plinked like a clock counting down. Clara dismounted first, pulling Gabe from his mare. Off the horses, we fight on foot from here. Ethan swung down rifle, already shouldered. He could hear them coming, their pursuers spilling into the tunnel, confident, thinking they had cornered prey. Clara moved like a shadow beside him, her chain of scars glowing faint in the lantern light. She whispered low, fierce, "No one owns us." The first man broke into the cavern. Ethan fired. The shot cracked thunder in the close space, and the man fell, weapon clattering. Chaos erupted. The cavern became a storm of echoes, gunfire, bouncing from stone shouts tangled in dust. Ethan fired methodically, his training pulling him into calm precision. One shot to wound one, to drive them back. Clara moved with feral grace, slipping between boulders, striking fast and vanishing before bullets could find her. At the center, Gabe crouched, low, eyes wide, but he remembered Clara's command. He stayed between them, ducking from cover to cover as they shielded him. The Phoenix men pressed harder, more spilling from the tunnel than Ethan had counted outside. Too many, he growled. Clara's eyes flashed. Then we used their weight against them. She grabbed a rusted lantern from a shelf and hurled it toward the tunnel mouth. It shattered in fire. Flames licked up the wooden support, smoke curling thick. The tunnel behind the Phoenix men blazed alive, cutting off retreat. Panic broke their formation. Ethan seized the moment. Now, toward the back, Gabe scrambled up, pointing toward a narrow passage half hidden behind collapsed rock. There. It leads out to the ridge. Clara slung the boy onto her shoulders without slowing, strength flowing through her like forged iron. Ethan covered their retreat firing until the last chambered round clicked dry. Then they plunged into the narrow passage, smoke chasing their heels, the cavern collapsing behind in a roar of fire and splintering beams. They stumbled out onto the ridge as the mine belched smoke and flame. The horses spooked, but Faithful had bolted to a sheltered hollow and returned when Clara whistled sharp. Gabe slid from her shoulders, coughing, his face streaked with soot. "We made it," he rasped. Ethan reloaded with shaking hands, eyes scanning the canyon below. Figures scattered in confusion, some fleeing, others trying to regroup. But the mine entrance was lost to fire. For now, at least, Phoenix had been denied their trap. Clara wiped blood from a shallow cut on her cheek, her chest heaving. She looked back at the smoke rising in thick plumes. "They'll know now. We're not just running, we're fighting." Ethan's gaze locked on hers. His voice was steady, fierce with resolve. "Then we finish it. Not just for us, for every child they've taken." Gabe stared between them, fear still bright in his eyes, but tempered now by something stronger. "Hope." He whispered, "Then we go to Ashlock Ridge." The words hung heavy in the night air, heavier even than the smoke curling from the canyon. Clara's hand tightened on the stallion's reins. "Yes, Ashlock Ridge. That's where this ends." Ethan nodded once, grim. His brother's ghost lingered at his shoulder, and in the boy's trembling voice he heard a promise that none of this would be in vain. The night stretched wide, and endless stars burning above like watchful eyes. And though the road ahead promised blood, they rode on together, three shadows bound by fire, fury, and the fragile seed of freedom. The ride from Marrow Gap was long, bitter, and cloaked in silence. Smoke from the ruined mine rose behind them like a dark banner, a signal to anyone watching that something had shifted, that Phoenix had been bloodied even if only a little. The land ahead stretched wild and unforgiving. Pines loomed heavy with shadows, and the canyon winds carried a sharp edge that cut deeper than cold. Ethan rode at the lead, his rifle resting across his lap, eyes scanning every ridge for movement. Clara followed close, the black stallion's gait fluid and relentless. Gabe rode between them, his small frame swaying in the saddle, exhaustion pulling at his eyelids. Every so often, he muttered fragments, numbers, codes, half-finished commands burned into his memory by Phoenix conditioning. Clara listened, jaw clenched. Each word was a reminder of what had been done to him, of the same scars carved into her own body and mind. At last, Ethan slowed the pace, guiding them into a sheltered hollow where a stream cut through stone. He dismounted, stretching the ache from his legs, then glanced at the boy. "Time to rest, son. Horse needs it, and so do you." Gabe slid down stiffly, clutching the mare's mane for balance. His face was pale beneath the soot. Clara caught him before he stumbled, steadying him with a gentleness that contrasted with the steel in her eyes. "You're safe here," she murmured, brushing damp hair from his forehead. "We'll keep watch." The boy's eyes flickered to hers, searching for cracks in her promise. He found none. Slowly he nodded. Night fell heavy. They built a small fire, flames barely more than a whisper, careful not to draw attention. The smell of pine smoke mingled with the metallic tang of gun oil as Ethan cleaned his rifle. Clara sat across from him, mending a torn sleeve with steady hands. Gabe curled near the fire, already drifting into uneasy sleep, whimpers breaking through as nightmares clutched him. Ethan's gaze lingered on the boy, then lifted to Clara. In the flickering light, her scars looked sharper, etched deeper, but her posture was calm, purposeful. "He's tougher than he looks," Ethan said quietly. Clara didn't look up from her stitching. Phoenix only kept the strong alive. The rest... She let the words trail off the fire, filling the silence with its low hiss. Ethan swallowed hard. "What they did to you, what they're doing to him, it makes me sick." Her needle paused, then resumed. "Don't pity us. Just help us end it." There was no softness in her tone, but something in her eyes, when they finally lifted to meet his, spoke of a trust slowly taking root. Ethan nodded. "Ashlock Ridge. That's where we'll cut the rod out." By dawn, Gabe was restless again, insisting they press on. "They'll follow the smoke," he said, his voice hoarse but certain. "We can't stay." Clara swung into the saddle without hesitation. "He's right. We ride." And ride they did. For 3 days, they pushed westward across ridges and plains scarred with old mining scars, past abandoned homesteads where windows gaped like empty eyes. The further they traveled, the clearer the boy's memory became. He pointed out landmarks, naming them with chilling familiarity. "That ridge training runs," he said on the second day. "They made us climb until our hands bled." On the third, he pointed to a rock shaped like a crouched bear. "We weren't allowed to stop there. said it was cursed, but I think it was because runaways used to hide food in the cracks. Each revelation tightened Ethan's grip on the rain's fury building in his chest. He forced himself to breathe to let Clara's steady presence ground him. She listened to Gabe's memories with the same silence, but her knuckles whitened on the stallion's reins, and once, when the boy described the sound of the conditioning helmets, her lips moved silently, forming words Ethan couldn't hear. Prayers. Or curses. On the fourth day, as the sun dipped low, they crested a ridge that opened onto a wide plain. And there it was, Ashlock Ridge. From above, it looked almost ordinary, a cluster of warehouses surrounding a rail line, smoke drifting from chimneys, wagons moving in and out. To any passerby, it was industry commerce, nothing more. But Clara's breath hissed through her teeth. It's all wrong. Too clean, too guarded. Ethan pulled his spyglass, studying the depot below. Men moved with military precision uniforms, half hidden beneath work clothes. Children were nowhere visible, but the sheer efficiency of the operation reeked of Phoenix. Gabe shifted uneasily. That's it, he whispered. That's where they took the others. Below ground. Claire's jaw tightened. Then below ground is where we'll go. Ethan lowered the glass eyes, narrowing. He'd seen forts, battlefields, ambush sites, but never had he felt such a mix of dread and purpose. They think they're untouchable, he said. Let's prove them wrong. Clara met his gaze, the firelight of resolve blazing between them. For the first time since the auction block, her lips curved in something like a smile, fierce, unyielding. Then we begin, she said. That night they found shelter in a stand of pines overlooking the depot. Horses tethered fire, quenched weapons laid out they planned in whispers. We wait until midnight, Clara said, tracing the perimeter with a stick in the dirt. Guards change every 2 hours, West Side's weakest service entrance less lit. Ethan studied the sketch. You're sure? Her eyes flicked to the compound, then back. I can smell antiseptic from here. That's the medical wing. Service doors will take us close. Gabe hugged his knees, voice shaking. You'll find the others. Clara reached out, resting a scarred hand lightly on his shoulder. We'll find them, and we'll bring them out. Ethan's rifle glinted faint in the moonlight as he checked the chamber. His voice was low, steady, meant for both of them. Then we finish what they started. And this time, no one gets left behind. The wind shifted, carrying the faint whistle of a train approaching the depot. A dark silhouette against the stars, its cars heavy with secrets. The moment stretched between them, fear, fury, and fragile hope balanced on a knife's edge. Ethan exhaled slowly, his decision hard as iron. At midnight, he said, we walk into the lion's den. Midnight came wrapped in fog, the kind that seemed to cling to the skin and swallow sound. The depot below pulsed faint with lamplight, a beast breathing through its chimneys, unaware of the hunters crouched on the ridge above. Ethan adjusted the strap of his rifle and looked once more at Clara. In the darkness, her profile was sharp, her eyes silvered by starlight. She didn't need to speak. The fire in her gaze told him everything resolved fury and something deeper, quieter that anchored him more than all the training he'd ever had. Beside them, Gabe shivered, his hands clenched into fists, small knuckles white. He tried to look brave, but his breath hitched like a boy fighting shadows. Clara knelt, her voice soft. You're not going with us, Gabe. You'll stay here, hidden. He shook his head fiercely. No, I can help. I know the halls, the rooms. You'll help more by waiting. Ethan interrupted, firm but gentle. He crouched low so their eyes met. If we don't come back by dawn, you ride east. Find the old trail, follow it to Driftbrush. Hide with the horses, keep yourself alive. That's your part. Tears gleamed in the boy's eyes, but after a long silence, he nodded. You'll come back, he whispered, almost like a plea. Clara rested a hand on his cheek, her scarred fingers unexpectedly tender. I keep my promises. The descent was a ghost march. They moved between shadows, the depot sprawling below like a sleeping city. Wagons creaked. Guards shuffled. A dog barked once before being silenced with a sharp whistle. They reached the west wall low and weathered, shielded by stacked crates. Clara pressed her ear to the service door, then without hesitation shoved her palm against the panel. A faint beep answered, and the lock gave way. Ethan's brow furrowed. That chip in your hand. Her mouth twitched bitter. Phoenix never thought their leash would turn against them. Inside, the air shifted to antiseptic sharpness. Whitewashed corridors stretched lined with numbered doors. The hum of machinery vibrated faint through the walls. Ethan's heart thudded in his chest. He'd crept through enemy lines before, but never had he felt such crawling dread. Clara walked as if the halls remembered her footsteps. Every sense sharpened her posture, both predator and survivor. She nodded left, and Ethan followed past rooms with metal tables, restraints glinting under harsh light. He saw it then, the mark of Phoenix everywhere. A child's toy on the floor of one room, a bloody handprint smeared across another door. Evidence not of commerce, but captivity. Clara's breath caught almost imperceptibly. She froze at a doorway, staring through the small glass window. Inside, a boy lay strapped to a table, wires trailing from a sleek metal helm fitted tight to his skull. His body twitched with every pulse of light on the machine beside him. Ethan's stomach clenched. God Almighty! Clara's voice was steel. We're not leaving him! She snapped the lock with brutal strength, bursting inside. Ethan followed, covering her as she ripped the device free. The boy convulsed once, then gasped, eyes fluttering open. They were gray storm, gray like Clara's. Name, she urged, unfastening straps. The boy blinked. James, I think. Ethan lifted him gently, whispering, You're safe now. The word felt like both a lie and a promise. Then the alarm wailed. A shriek of metal and siren split the silence, red lights flooding the hall. Ethan cursed under his breath. They know. Clara grabbed James's hand, pulling him toward the corridor. We move now. But from the far end came voices, guards rushing closer, boots pounding, rifles clattering. Ethan positioned himself between the children and the threat rifle steady. He met Clara's eyes. You lead them out. I'll hold no. Her voice cut sharp. We do this together. The first guard appeared, muzzle flashing. Ethan dropped him with a shot. Clara was already moving low and fast, disarming the second with a twist and sending his weapon skittering down the hall. James stumbled and Clara scooped him up without breaking stride. This way she barked, sprinting toward a heavy door marked Exit. Ethan backed after her, firing, reloading, firing again. Bullets sparked off steel, the hall filling with smoke and screams. At the door, Clara slammed her palm against another panel. It clicked. They shoved through into a stairwell, damp concrete rising and falling into shadow. Up, Clara commanded. They climbed, James clinging to her like a shadow, Ethan behind them, his lungs burning. The alarm still howled, echoing up the stairwell, a chorus of fury and warning. When they burst through the next door, they found themselves in a wide loading bay. Crates towered around them, the air heavy with oil and gunpowder. But worse guards already waited, rifles leveled. And between them, poised like a spider in her web, stood a woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes like ice. Her voice carried across the dock. Subject S7. Clara. Clara froze. The name spoken like ownership sent a tremor down her spine. Ethan saw her fist clenched, jaw tighten. The woman's smile was thin. You disappoint me. After all we invested. You were meant to lead them, not betray us. Clara's voice, when it came, was low, deliberate. I was born free, and I'll die that way. Ethan raised his rifle. Then, you'll have to go through us first. The standoff stretched. Guards tensed, triggers half pulled. James whimpered against Clara's chest. The night pressed close, suffocating. Then Ethan said the words like iron striking anvil, run, if you want. But this is where Phoenix falls. And the dock erupted in fire. Gunfire cracked like lightning in a summer storm. The echo roared through the loading dock, bouncing off steel beams and stacked crates until it seemed the whole world was made of gunpowder and flame. Ethan fired with calm precision, each squeeze of the trigger measured, deliberate. He wasn't fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for the boy clutched in Clara's arms, for the children hidden in cells beneath their feet, and for the haunted woman beside him, whose very existence spat in the face of Phoenix's cruelty. Clara moved like a tempest. She ducked behind crates, surged forward, and struck a guard with such force that his rifle flew clattering into the dark. Her stallion's strength lived in her arms, and every motion carried the fury of someone who had lived as property and vowed never to be chained again. James clung to her back, small arms wrapped tight around her neck. his thin chest heaving with terror. Yet even through his fear, Ethan saw the boy's eyes widen in awe, watching the scarred woman fight as though nothing could stop her. The silver-haired Dr. Vaughn stood untouched, her eyes cold with fascination rather than fear. She didn't flinch as her men fell. Instead, she studied Clara as if observing an experiment in motion. Remarkable, she called above the chaos. The enhancements hold even under extreme emotional duress. You see, Mr. Cole, she was never meant to be free. She is proof of our perfection. Ethan answered with a bullet that shattered the crate beside her head. The only thing you've perfected is evil, he spat. Vaughn's smile didn't waver. And you're the fool who thinks you can burn out fire with water. She gestured, and 3 more guards stormed in from the opposite bay door. Clara spun, eyes blazing. Get to the children, she barked at Ethan. I'll cover. He hesitated, only a heartbeat, then nodded. Don't you die on me. He sprinted toward the far corridor where he knew the holding cells lay. Bullets whined past splintering wood. One grazed his shoulder, but he gritted his teeth and pressed on. Behind him, Clara's roar echoed a war cry, half human, half something forged from pain. The holding cells smelled of bleach and despair. Ethan smashed the first lock with the butt of his rifle and threw the door open. Inside, 3 children huddled together, their eyes vacant with terror. It's all right, Ethan urged, crouching low. I'm here to take you out. Follow me, quietly. They blinked at him, unsure. Then James's voice rang out behind him, shaky but determined. He's with me. Trust him. Recognition sparked in their faces. One girl, barely 10, whispered, Ghost. James nodded, holding out a hand. Come on, we're free. One by one, they followed, fragile but alive. Ethan led them through the corridor, unlocking what doors he could, until 6 children trailed behind him, dirty, trembling but breathing. He wanted to save them all, every last one, but time was bleeding away. Above them, Clara still fought her shouts and the thunder of blows echoing down the stairwell. He prayed she was still standing. Clara was more than standing. She was fire. She was storm. She was every ounce of rage Phoenix had ever bred in her turned back on them. She moved faster than the guards could track, her fists breaking bone, her kicks shattering ribs. James clung to her, still screaming when bullets flew too close, but Clara shielded him with her own body, her voice fierce. Hold on, James! Hold on! At last the dock grew still. Only groans of the fallen remained. Clara's chest heaved, her arms streaked with blood, not her own. She lowered James gently, meeting his wide eyes with a steadiness that calmed his trembling. Then Vaughn's voice cut through the quiet like a blade. You think this is victory? No, Clara. This is a field test. Every reaction of yours, every choice you make, it's all data. You're still ours. Clara's face hardened. She raised her chin, gray eyes burning. I was never yours. For the first time, Vaughn's composure cracked. She drew a small pistol from her coat, pointing it squarely at James. Then perhaps the boy will remind you who holds power here. No. Clara lunged. But the gunshot came first. The sound froze the world sharp and merciless. James stumbled, falling backward, only to be caught by Ethan, who had burst into the dock with the rescued children at his heels. Smoke curled from the barrel of Vaughn's pistol, but the boy was unharmed. Ethan had thrown his shoulder into Vaughn's arm at the final instant, forcing her shot wide. Pain seared through him where the bullet grazed his ribs, but he didn't falter. He slammed Vaughn against the crate, wrenching the pistol free. Clara's roar shook the rafters. She crossed the distance in 2 strides and drove her fist into Vaughn's face. The doctor crumpled, blood streaming from her nose, her elegance gone in an instant. Ethan staggered, breathing hard. James scrambled up, clinging to Clara's leg. Is she dead? The boy whispered. Clara stared down at Vaughn, unconscious but alive. Not yet. Her voice dripped venom. She'll face judgment awake. Ethan wiped blood from his side eyes, scanning the trembling children gathered around them. We need to get them out now. Reinforcements will be swarming in minutes. Clara nodded. The east fence. We saw a gap. Together they herded the children, Clara carrying one too weak to walk Ethan, shielding the rear with rifle raised. The dock doors burst open behind them as they fled into the night, shouts echoing. But the forest was waiting. The dark swallowed them whole. They ran until the children's legs gave out. Then they carried them. They didn't stop until the depot lights were nothing but a faint glow on the horizon. At last, in a hollow sheltered by pines, they collapsed. Clara set James down and checked each child's injuries. Ethan lowered himself against a tree, exhaustion pounding through him, ribs aflame. But when he looked at them, these children who should have been broken, who were instead alive, he felt something bloom in his chest. Hope. Clara sat across from him, hair-wild face smeared with soot, and for the first time she smiled without restraint. "We did it," she whispered. Ethan nodded, his voice rough. "We're not done yet, but tonight we won." Around them the children huddled together, some already dozing in the safety they hadn't known in years. James sat close to Clara, eyes heavy but shining with trust. And above, through the canopy, stars pierced the darkness like 1,000 promises that tomorrow might be different. Ethan met Clara's gaze across the fire's faint glow. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. For the first time in a long, long while, silence meant peace. Dawn broke slow and heavy, the sky streaked with crimson as though the earth itself bled. Smoke from the depot still curled faintly on the horizon, proof that Phoenix was not vanquished, only wounded. Ethan rose first, every bone aching. His ribs throbbed where Vaughn's bullet had grazed him, but he ignored it. His eyes went to the children curled close to Clara for warmth, their small chests rising and falling in steady rhythm. They had survived a nightmare, but survival was only the first step. Clara stirred as he watched. Her hair hung loose, her eyes rimmed red from exhaustion, but there was a strength in her that shamed even the morning sun. She whispered, careful not to wake the little ones. "They'll come again." Phoenix doesn't stop. Ethan nodded grimly. "Then we don't stop either. We take what we found, the files, the device. We bring it to someone who can't look away." Her gaze was steady. "Do you believe there is anyone left who'll stand against them?" He let out a slow breath. "Maybe. Maybe not. But the truth has a way of breaking through walls money builds." He paused, eyes softening as he studied her face. "And if not, then we make our own stand." Clara didn't smile, not exactly, but something flickered across her face, fragile like sunlight through clouds. "Then we fight. Together." They moved east through the pines, keeping low, leading the weary children in shifts, some riding, some carried, some stubbornly walking despite blistered feet. James stayed glued to Clara's side, his hand in hers as though she were an anchor in a world determined to sweep him away. By midday, they reached the ruined chapel Clara had mentioned. Its roof sagged, pews long rotted, but the stone walls still stood. Sunlight fell through the cracks like holy fire, painting the dust in golden beams. Inside, Ethan helped settle the children, tearing blankets into makeshift bedding, while Clara tended wounds with careful hands. Her movements were both fierce and gentle, like she had decided these children would know kindness if it killed her. One of the younger girls whispered, "Are we safe? Now?" Clara looked into her eyes. "Safe with us. Always." The words carried the weight of an oath. Later, when the children finally slept, Ethan and Clara sat outside on the chapel steps. The land stretched wide and endless before them, but for once it didn't feel empty. Ethan lit a small pipe, the smoke curling around his head like ghosts. "When I first saw you on that block," he said quietly, "I thought I was buying trouble, something I'd regret." Clara arched a brow, exhaustion fading to faint amusement. "And now?" He looked at her, really looked. "Now I know I found the only partner who'll ever ride beside me." Silence fell rich and full. The wind stirred the grass, the world holding its breath. Clara's eyes softened, her voice low. "You didn't just free me, Ethan. You gave me back myself." He reached across the space between them, taking her scarred hand in his rough one. For once, she didn't pull away. That night, as stars wheeled overhead, the children huddled close in sleep. James dreamed without nightmares for the first time in years, his small body finally at peace. The others stirred only with the soft noises of children, not the screams of captives. And outside, Ethan and Clara kept watch, not out of fear but out of duty, shoulders brushing as they sat in quiet vigilance. The battle was far from over. Phoenix still breathed its reach long and vicious. But on that lonely ridge with 6 rescued children and the first glimmers of hope in their eyes, a different truth was born. Phoenix had underestimated them. It had underestimated the will of a rancher scarred by war, a woman forged in fire, and a boy too stubborn to break. Together they had carved a sanctuary from ashes. Together they had declared war not with armies, but with defiance, with loyalty, with love. And together they would ride into whatever came next. The dawn that followed did not belong to Phoenix. It belonged to them. Your thoughts will help us create meaningful stories. And if you want to hear more powerful healing stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the bell icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And most importantly, share this video with people who need a little hope today. Thank you so much for your time. We hear you, we listen to you, and we are honored to tell these stories for you.